Welcome back. We're talking about climate change and innovation. Some see climate change as a crisis. Others are seeing it as an opportunity. Joining us for this part of the program from New York, Jigar Shah is president and co-founder of Generate Capital and author of Creating Climate Wealth, Unlocking the Impact Economy. And with us in the studio is Michael Dorsey, is co-founder and vice president of strategy at US Climate Plan. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael. Let's start with you. You know, we've heard about vertical forests, but there is so much more going on, isn't there? From crustacean concrete, even harnessing methane from animals. Where is the growth in this economy, and can it sustain itself? Is there a lot of investment?
The growth is tremendous, and really the true growth is in the renewable sector. Right now, we've got a renewable sector that's bigger than oil and gas. There are more jobs in the renewables, particularly in solar, than in all of Walmart. There are more people working in solar in Texas than all in oil and gas. There are more people working in solar in California than there are in the entertainment industry. So the growth is tremendous. Last year was one of the biggest years for solar in the world, and that's tempered a little bit on the residential side, but the reality is there's a tremendous upside for solar and wind and renewables in general as we really drive this 21st century energy industry forward and leave behind that old fossil fuel industry of the 20th century.
Jigar, what excites you most, and how long is this going to take? Because we are in a race against time if, as 95% of the world believe, that climate change is happening already.
Well, I think it starts from the fact that we have done so well in solar and wind that we can copy that trajectory in other sectors. And so when you look at just the sheer amount of progress we've made, 75% now of all new capacity, electricity capacity, is renewable. And we can achieve that in electric vehicles. We can achieve that in anaerobic digesters. We can achieve that in battery storage, in energy efficiency, and even in fuel cells. And so you see a number of sectors that are ready for, you know, going from the $500 million level to the $5 billion level over the next 2 to 3 years.
Michael, we saw the Paris Climate Agreement. Obviously, that's governments coming together, but a big part of it was actually businesses going as well and making commitments and also getting on board. Who's going to win here? Is it going to be the private sector that ultimately drives this green economy?
You know, I think the fact is that the people are going to win. You know, societies are going to win. The private sector is absolutely critical in this, and governments are critical for setting the benchmarks and setting the norms of which the direction of the industry. But the fact is that the benefits accrue to people and societies. When we get out of the old 20th century energy and into the 21st century renewable energy, that pays huge dividends for. On the public health side, it pays huge dividends to people's in their wallets in terms of the energy cost savings that they occur. So really, it's people that win and countries that win, and the world really wins with this transition.
Jigar, Michael just said governments have to set a benchmark. What if they don't? Could we see innovation roll back, or will it happen anyway?
No, I mean, I think that governments still have to lead, but I think that where people get confused is the federal government does not have to lead. And so in the United States, you've got 25 states that are actually not only maintaining their mandates, but they're expanding their mandates because they see the economic development. You also have over 100 cities that are expanding their mandate to making sure that they have solar on every rooftop, electric buses on every street, LED lighting in every street light. And so when you think about government, you have to think about all the layers of government, including the local government, which frankly is more responsive to the economic development opportunity.
Michael, what about the infrastructure, though? Obviously, energy needs infrastructure. We have a lot of legacy infrastructure. Can that work without government help? Obviously, we've seen big moves in China, for example, where they have 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans. But not all economies are like that.
Well, I think, and maybe Jigar would agree with this, one of the future battles to really push this industry forward, to push renewables forward, is going to be reconfiguring the utility sector. Right now, we've got really, I'll call them intransigent actors in certain jurisdictions.
Vested interest, too.
Well, absolutely vested interest, because the fact is that with the price falling in solar and wind and renewables in general, that price is actually means that those small companies that are trying to lead this transition are actually competing with existing utilities. So we want a landscape now where if we don't have the opening at the, you know, in those local markets, then we're not going to get the big moves that we need. So the battle is going to be certainly with breaking up utilities, I think, in the sort of medium term, and then changing the landscape to really open up the sector. You know, California is our largest sort of renewable market, as it were. But the fact is that that market could be 3 times what it is now. And so some of those limits in other markets, we've got a situation in Florida, the Sunshine State, where, you know, rooftop solar is arguably illegal. You know, and it's really
very difficult. Yeah,
well, very difficult.
Jigger?
We've almost fixed that, but I think that that, you know, as the person who's the most hated person in the electric utility sector, because I've done more to actually threaten their business than I think as any other single person, we're winning that battle, right? I mean, and the reason we're winning the battle is not because we're smarter than them, but just because the passion is on our side. You know, when you think about ratepayers, it's not self-interested entrepreneurs like myself that are making these changes. It is thousands upon thousands of people on fixed pensions who are saying, you know, you cannot continue this trajectory where people's electricity bills and water bills are increasing at 2 and 3 times the rate of inflation. That's just not sustainable. And it's our technologies that can lock their electricity prices and water prices in for the next 20 years at a rate that's half the rate of inflation.
Michael, there's a big battle, obviously, in the developed world because you have these entrenched interests, you have these massive utilities. What about the developing world? Can they actually find innovation is much more readily and technology much more readily adapted into their societies when it comes to climate change?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you've got great opportunities across the developing world for leapfrogging technologies, you know, particularly on the renewable side. And so that's something that I think is playing out. But you have some of the same barriers in the developing world as you do as the developed world. Lots of places, you take South Africa, for example, where I've done a lot of work. There are constraints to what residential consumers can do in terms of installing solar, even though the government is leading that. But at the same time, governments in the global south and in developing countries, they have already put investments into capital-intensive, old 20th century fossil technology. So right now, those interests, those investments are competing with this new marketplace. So there's a challenge in both the developing and the developed world.
But I would argue that in general, the growth rates that are required to bring the developing world into the modern economy, you know, like it accommodates the utilities not being against us, but actually our partners, because they actually physically can't build enough power plant capacity using Utility 1.0 technology. The thing about President Obama started Power Africa for the sole you know, like sort of intention of building out natural gas infrastructure in Africa, and it's failed miserably. Almost all of the infrastructure that they built under the Power Africa program has been through large-scale renewables, both solar and wind, because they're easier to build, and the utilities were fine with it because they recognized that they weren't going to be able to build the natural gas infrastructure that they wanted to build.
Michael, obviously energy is a big part, 23–24% of emissions. What about other areas of the green economy in terms of investment and success? There's been a lot of movement on food, for example. Food uses a lot of energy. Meatless meat, Soylent Green, all these things that seem very weird and science fiction-y to a lot of people who are used to their meat and potatoes diet. But this is changing rapidly too, right?
Well, it's certainly a landscape that's changing, but you know, let's be clear. The hugest transition is really being driven by wind and solar in the renewable sector.
Right.
Certainly other sectors are important. You know, Jigger mentioned, you know, gas, and you sort of alluded to agriculture. Those things are definitely important, and there are ways of interconnecting, you know, those sort of marginal actors. But the real driving force in this sort of change, in this transition, is really solar and wind. And also, I would add, actually, storage is playing a huge new role in this transition.
Because you've got to store this solar, you've got to store, yes, carry on, Jigger.
Well, if there's one headline that people should take away, it's that there are hundreds of technologies that were invented in the 1970s that haven't had a chance to be fully deployed. And solar and wind have proven the way to get access to trillion-dollar pools of capital. And all of these other technologies are now looking to copy solar and wind's trajectory to access the same trillion-dollar pools of capital, whether it's anaerobic digesters, fuel cells, battery storage. These are all technologies that are over 20 years old that just were never given a chance to scale up.
Michael, what about innovators, small innovators in the marketplace? Are they now getting access to capital? Are they being able to realize their ideas, or is it still, is there still a bias against the green innovator?
I think there's definitely some tremendous new opportunities for access, and those are happening. There are constraints on that access, so as Jigar can testify to. You've got a situation where, particularly in the United States, you've got some barriers to these innovators, whereas around the world, the leading, sort of innovators that were on the solar front is China. China's putting in much more solar than the United States, and the United States is actually 3 behind, China and Germany. So you've got a situation where there is definitely opportunities for capital access, but that is sort of constrained. You look at the current administration in this country without a real perspective on, 21st century energy technologies, renewable energy technologies, a strange commitment to old, dead fossil fuel energy.
More coal, yeah.
Well, but in a weird way, though. I mean, the EP administrator was in front of a coal plant a couple weeks ago, and indeed that coal company that he stood in front of was actually trying to sell that particular mine. So you've got a curious sort of confused agenda at the federal level, but there definitely are new pools of capital coming open to innovators.
Jigar, you're smiling because you've run the gamut on this obstacle before. Tell us.
Well, I mean, I think we've reached irreversible momentum, right? I mean, we are the largest single wealth creator in the world right now. There are more millionaires being created around the resource efficiency revolution than there are in any other sector. I just think it's without parallel. When you think about large families in Brazil, Costa Rica, Ghana, all of them want in on this action. They are the ones who are trying to figure out how to open up their markets to all of these solutions. And so it's an inevitability now. It doesn't matter what Trump says or the premier of China says or anyone else. I mean, at this point, everyone is scrambling to get ahead of this trillion-dollar opportunity.
Last question for both of you. Michael, what's your favorite innovation out there you come across in the last few months that you think is really a game changer?
I think my favorite innovation is changing up the way in which we allow people to gain access to renewable power.
How so?
Well, particularly at the residential level, reducing regulations and barriers to entry for consumers. I mean, that's the true innovation. I think that's breaking down the regulatory barriers and the access to this new technology. That for me, it's a sort of a basic innovation, but it's the one that's really going to deliver the marketplace. That's the thing that will triple the California marketplace in renewables.
Because consumers can make a choice on their doorstep.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. And indeed, you're seeing people do this now. The price of solar has been falling, as Jigar knows, over the past couple of years. It's fallen so much now that it's actually economical for consumers, particularly at the residential level, to purchase it outright, to purchase panels outright and not to go through third parties. But they're faced with challenges in terms of interconnecting and so forth. So as the price is coming down and making great opportunities, but then as we move away these barriers to entry, that's going to be the thing that drives the market forward, I think.
Jigar, your favorite innovation, obviously you're biased because you're in the energy sector and it's making you a lot of money. Is it fusion energy? Is it something else? What are you most excited about?
It really is not technology. I would say that given that baby boomers are retiring at a rate of thousands of them a week, my parents and my in-laws, their largest investment position is in clean energy. And they are making between 7 and 9% returns every year compared to 3% returns in a prudential annuity. And so you're seeing thousands upon thousands of folks getting access via fintech companies like Wonder Capital or Open Energy or others, and they're getting involved in these assets directly in their community and making far superior returns in their retirement.
Jigar Shah, thank you so much. Greening economy makes you a lot of green as well. Michael Dorsey also, thank you so much in the studio. That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter, we're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook, that's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us.